Welcome to the beach. I brought my IKEA bag. Always take an IKEA bag to the beach. It's a thing. I've got my hat, just in case it gets sunny. Unlikely. There's a cagoule in here somewhere, because it is Britain. I've got my ball. I've got my bucket and spade, so I should be fine. Do you know what? We loved doing beach last year so much that we decided to just do beach again. Because it's just really good to recognise that our faith is fun and that we are a family together and that sometimes God does stuff in us which is serious and deep, and sometimes at the same time he does stuff which is just fun. So Reach at the Beach, Reach Derby at the Beach it's about having fun together. It's going to be about exploring what it means to be family together. And we're going to talk about what it means to rest and have time in God's presence. We're going to talk about some of the things that we are called to do together. Some of the things that God is saying when he says to us as a people, let's go. And we're going to do that over the next few weeks. But I wanted to start us off with one of the few places in the Bible where we see God's family on a beach together. And it's in Exodus 14. And it is in this moment, just before we know what happens, just before God parts the waves and saves his people, when you've got this gathering of people, of Israelites on the beach, people who have been brought out of Egypt, people who have decided that following Moses was a good idea, but they haven't yet been through that incredible experience of walking through the parted sea, which made them a nation. Now we can look back at it from the perspective of knowing that we are gathered here today as a people who have been brought through the waters, as a people who have been rescued, a people who have been saved. But we're going to look back at them, at these people on the beach, and have a think about what it was like for them. I'm just going to do a little bit of the story so far. And I'm going to do it with the help of Pack 7 Kids show, which is called Nani Unglian, which means little fingers, and which tells Bible stories using little fingers. So I've got them for some pictures, but you might remember the story. So Joseph, a really long time ago, has gone to Egypt, done quite well for himself in the end. And he brought the whole family into Egypt, and they're there for 400 years. Now, 400 years is a really long time. Any of you learned at school about the Great Fire of London? Put your hand up if you've learned about the Great Fire of London. Like that was a really long time ago, wasn't it, right? That wasn't 400 years ago. That wasn't quite 400 years ago. It's a really, really long time that the people have been in Egypt. And they've been, in that time, they've been in slavery. And maybe you remember this bit of the story, if you were here, from Becky from last week. That Moses' mum, when Pharaoh was just getting really stressed at how fast the Israelites were multiplying, and he decides that he's going to deal with that by killing the firstborn, by killing the children, all the male babies. And Moses' mum decides that she's not going to let that happen. And when he gets too big to hide under the bed anymore, she puts him in a basket and he floats off down the river. And to cut a very long story short, Moses grows up, gets himself into a bit of trouble, runs out into the desert, hangs around as a shepherd for a really long time. And then this happens. He has an encounter with God. An encounter with God, and then in this encounter, God looks like fire. And what God says to Moses is, I have heard their cry. The people have been crying out because they're slaves, they're being oppressed. And God says to Moses, I have heard the cry of the people. There are times when we wonder whether God is hearing the cries that we are crying out. But I think that, like Moses, God says to us, I've heard your cry. I'm going to do something. I'm doing something. And he does do something. And Pharaoh is not keen to let the people go. And so God sends plagues to convince Pharaoh that he is powerful, to show Pharaoh, to show Egypt that God is more powerful even than Egypt. And I think this is meant to be a plague of flies, I'm thinking. And so it gets to the point where Pharaoh just says, okay, go. And Moses leads the people and they go. And they go out into the desert. They go out into the unknown. And weirdly, God doesn't take them the easy way back to the promised land. He sends them an odd way, a difficult way. This is a bit like on a match day, for me on North Derby, deciding to go to Shalley's house in South Derby and deciding, oh, I know what I'll do. I'll go through Pride Park. Like, that would be a really stupid thing to go. It's not very direct, and it's going to be difficult. But no, God sends them a difficult way. And they end up here. We don't know where here is, because the Bible is not particularly concerned with the geography. It's concerned with what's happening. But it's on a beach, on the edge of a sea, in a desert. And this is where God tells the people to camp. They haven't ended up here by accident. They've been led by God's presence. And this time it's a moving fire, not just a fire that isn't burning up on a bush. God's presence is going ahead of them as a pillar of moving fire. Fire at nighttime, cloud in the daytime. And that's what the people are following. And they followed it to here, and God says, camp here. And do you know what? It even says, camp here, everyone will think this is a stupid place to camp. Because it's like this. Okay, this is a moment from my childhood for you. Yeah, and I can say anybody over 50 will remember what this is. But this is the moment that the Israelites are finding themselves in. In fact, this is the moment that God has put them in on purpose. I showed this to Katie last night, and I said, what does this say to you? And she said, well, that's a bad guy. I said, yeah. And the bad guy's coming, and there's nowhere for him to go. And that is exactly the situation of these people on the beach. The bad guy is coming, and there is nowhere for them to go. Because just after God tells them to camp on this beach, where there's the sea in front of them, and none of them can swim, and there are mountains beside them, so there's nowhere else to go. And then that's the moment at which Pharaoh appears, and they are trapped with their enemy, their powerful enemy, right behind them. And you see, we've read the end of the story, so we know what happens next. But as far as Israel are concerned, this is a wall. This is impossible to get past. There's no option to build a raft or to swim. It's a wall behind them, and they're facing an enemy in front of them. So here we are. Right, so in order to get our heads around this, I think we need to just make it happen slightly. So I need a Moses. Do I have a volunteer to be Moses? Jonathan Leach, you can be Moses. Jonathan, I don't think you look quite old enough, so I think, could you, thank you. Right, if you could just, there's loops on there somewhere. Let's go on your ears. There you go. Yeah, you can go over here. You're on the beach. So Moses has led the people to the beach, and in the scripture it describes it as being like an army. So we might imagine we might imagine that the army is kind of made up of youngish fighting men. So we can have, who can I see? I can see Dan, sorry. I can see Joel, right? You can come and be men on the beach. Ready to fight? Yeah. So it says army, so we think that it's probably just young men, but of course it's not just young men, is it? It's young, there are women there as well. So Shally, where's Shally hiding? Does she run away? Come on then, Shally, you can be on the beach. Yeah. Right, I was going to ask Hannah, but is Hannah not here? Oh, shame. I was going to ask her. But anyway, so thank you, on the beach. Yeah, facing that way. Good, you're ready. Ready. Good. Right, well, obviously there weren't just young people on the beach, was it? Because what Moses did was go to the people and say, you've all got to come. You've all got to come. You've all got to get out of here. So we're not going to put everybody on the stage because that would be a bit scary for me. But I do need, I need some grandparents. Chipper, you can be a grandparent. Do you want to bring Anna as well? So there were grandparents on the beach. There were parents with little kids on the beach. Anybody? Charlotte, could you come and bring a little kid? Yay! Well done, I know. There were parents on the beach with little kids. In fact, there were whole families on the beach. So there were like people with their mum, Catherine. You bring Barbara. She won't be willing, but there were people. There were people there with their mums. There were people there with their parents. There were people there who've got older kids with them. Would you like to go on the beach? Okay. There were people there with other people's kids. There you go. Yeah. So I don't think there was anybody in high heels, though, I'm thinking. Who else would we have on the beach? Is there anybody who's got a baby with them? Anybody who's got a baby with them that could come and be on the beach? Bring a baby. Oh, marvellous. You can bring the buggy if you like. Oh, there were people on the beach with teeny tiny babies. Wow. There were teenagers on the beach. Okay, I'm going to spot a teenager. Spotting a teenager who will speak to me again if I make them come up here. Yasin. Excellent. There were teenagers on the beach. And there were great grandparents on the beach. Betty, can you come and be on the beach? And there are all these people on the beach, and they have put their lives in Moses' hands. And do you know what happens next? What happens next is that Pharaoh shows up. Right, now I need somebody to be Pharaoh. Preferably somebody fairly tall, because chariots were scary. So have we got any... There's a man. You'll be Pharaoh, won't you? Looking over your shoulder. There we go. Right, it's a low-budget production. So you get a chariot, but it hasn't got any wheels or a horse. There you go. Now you're just going to stand over there. You do that. So what you want to think about is that, so you guys are all mountains. Can a few of you at least be a mountain? You guys are all mountains. And you guys are all mountains. And there's just one way through. And then these guys, and they're on a beach. And then Pharaoh is coming with all his armies and all his chariots. And there are actually a lot more of them than just what you can say where you are. And do you know what happens? You can put down the mountains because I don't want you to get too tired. What happened was that in great fear, the Israelites cried out. Are we surprised? Along that lines. And they cried out, and they all turned to Moses at this point. Do you want to turn to Moses and shake a fist at him? They all turned to Moses at this point, and they say, weren't there enough graves in Egypt? Did you bring us here so that we could die on a beach? So this is what the beach looked like. This is not a glorious moment of people realizing already what God is going to do. This is a moment of everybody turning on Moses and saying, why did you bring us here to die here? And what Moses said to them is, don't be afraid. Stand firm and see the deliverance that the Lord will accomplish. These Egyptians that you see today, these Egyptians that you can see today, which are terrifying you, you are never going to see them again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Now, it's a little bit sharp. It's not kind of like there, folks. It's a little bit kind of like, did you not just see what God did? Did you not just see what God did in Egypt, how he brought us out here? If he said he's going to deliver you, then he is going to deliver you. He is going to deliver you. He kind of just tells you if you could all just pipe down, please. And then I want to show you what God did next, because there are a load of us here. We talked a few weeks ago about, John came and he talked about David and Goliath. He talked about us facing our Goliath. He talked about how we stand and face the might of, and this picture is the might of the Egyptian Empire, which is probably the most powerful empire that is in the ancient world at the time. It is the most powerful enemy you could possibly have. And Israel are here on the beach and they've got no way out and they're facing their enemy. And what God does is he takes himself from his position where he's led them. He takes himself, his presence, this pillar of cloud and of fire, and he stands in between the enemy and the people. And the people spend a whole night on the beach waiting for that miracle where God parts the sea. They spend a whole night waiting. But in their waiting, God comes and stands between the people and the enemy that has come to destroy them. So I felt that what God really wanted to say to us today out of this story, you guys can go and sit down now if you like. Feel free to take a bucket. I felt like what God really wants to say to us about this story is there are times when we have to wait for the miracle. But if God has said that he is going to deliver us, then he is going to deliver us. If God has said that he is going to defeat the enemies in our lives, then he is going to defeat the enemies. Now, it's really interesting, the place names in the beginning of Exodus. I'm not going to attempt to say them because they're really tricky. But God says that they should camp near a place called Migdol, which is an Egyptian fortress. And he says that they should camp in the place in the mouth of the river. So that's how we know that there's nowhere else for them to go. They're in this mouth. But he says to them to camp opposite Baal-zephon. And that Baal-zephon is the Canaanite god of storms and sea. So God has had them camp in this place where the power of Egypt and the power of the sea box them in, and then he defeats both of them. And he defeats both of them by a slightly old man stretching his hand out over the sea and dry land coming. And the Israelites couldn't have expected that. It's really easy for us when we know the end of the story, because the last time that God spoke and seas parted and dry land happened, well, that was way back in Genesis. So it is the kind of thing that God does, but he hasn't done it for a really long time. And he hasn't done it since then. But in that moment, he did. In that moment, but in the moment before the moment before the miracle, he came and stood. His presence came and was between the people and their enemy.